Well, good day to you. It is July the 14th. I hope you're having a good day wherever you are. My name is Gary Willing, and as always, I want to welcome you to Search for Signs. And as I've done in nearly every one of the, I think now over 800 videos that I've put up since I started this channel a few years back, I've always encouraged everyone, nagged in some instances those people who have heard these videos before and haven't done it yet, but to investigate this information for yourself. Seek out the truth within this information for you. And if you don't, at the end of your search, see that it's true for you, then you've done exactly what I hoped and wanted and prayed for every one of you guys to do, and women to do, is to seek out the truth for yourself. Don't listen to me about it and believe me just because I said it. I like to talk about my own personal experiences with Maitreya to hopefully give a little bit of credence to what I talk about. But in the end of the day, it's for each and every one of us to dig deep in this information and see if it's true for us. I've included links in the description portion of every one of these videos that take you to websites that talk about this information. I've included, I think, the two best links at the very top to make it easier for you to start your search. The Share International site, hands down, is the best one to get the best background information on, and then the one right below it is another YouTube channel that has a video of Benjamin Creme, who is the spearhead of this information, talking about this information. He talks about the many miracle signs. He talks about what Maitreya means for humanity. He gives a little historical background of Maitreya and so forth. It's a wonderful video, and it's only about an hour long. Hopefully you'll take the time to listen to it and learn something from it, and then and only then will you see if there's any truth to it. Now, if you want to come back and join the discussion, of course, you're welcome to do it. Step into the spotlight of the Search for Signs comment section, I guess. If you want to, ask me a question, post a question in the comment section. If you want to ask me that question, without anybody else getting the answer, or if you just want to just write it out that way, you can email it to me at searchforsigns@mail.com, or you can just let me know what you think by posting a comment. Now, I want to thank everyone who has commented and asked a question since the last time I put a video up. And I got some really nice comments from some people, but I wanted to focus in on Alfred's comment and his question, because I don't know if you know this, Alfred, but what you were asking and the comment that you made are linked. So I'm going to dive into it a little further because I've been doing a lot of thinking about what you were asking, Alfred. Hopefully I can answer your question, and hopefully I can explain why I think your comment about unity and your question about love are one and the same. So, your comment was, "That's true, Carolyn. I was thinking the same thing earlier today, thinking about how much I've learned from these videos on unity." And unity is really the crux of what I wanted to talk about in reference to your question. I would like to learn about the levels of love, please. If goodwill is the lowest level of love, do you have an idea of what follows next up until the final level? I believe this can help me understand my own evolution and where I am soulfully. So thank you for that question. Like I said, you got me thinking, Alfred, so hopefully I'll answer it to where you have a better understanding of what I'm trying to talk about in terms of goodwill and those kind of things. But when I mentioned that goodwill is the lowest aspect of love, I was referring to it between nations. Okay, now, so when I first read your question, I was thinking, well, it really has to do with nations. And then I took a step back and I started thinking, I was like, well, actually it does have a lot to do with us individually, because goodwill is really not wishing somebody ill will. You're not doing anything for them. You're just not wishing them harm, I guess, right? So it would be the same with nations, because people don't understand that nations are unique, that all the nations, just as all the individuals are doing too, are creating this complex tapestry of unity, of harmony through diversity. That Bangladesh has a different purpose than Russia, that Russia has a different divine purpose and destiny as the United States, and so forth and so forth. And it's not for a country like the United States to tell some other country how to live its life and how to conduct its affairs. It's not divine to do that. In fact, it harms that other nation in a lot of ways. And so nations don't really have a cooperative goodwill relationship with one another. They're competing for the most part. And every nation has an excess of something, or a lot of excesses of something. And they hoard it and they keep it from another nation to help increase its power, perhaps, or its voice in the world, or whatever, to profit from it. If it just holds on and plays its cards right, it will know when to let everybody else in on those resources. And then if a poorer nation, a nation with less military might, has a resource that a powerful nation with a lot of military wants, well, they just go and grab it and take it, or exploit that country to get it, or something like that. So it creates distrust amongst these nations. It's destabilizing the peace in the world. It will eventually bring about the end of the world if we don't do something about it, according to Maitreya. The only thing that will bring about goodwill amongst these nations is the principle of sharing. So eventually it's going to get to the point where life is so bad on planet Earth that worse than it is now, apparently, and then we will look to Maitreya for what is the answer to our problem. And he will give humanity a choice. He'll say, sharing is the only way to give yourself a future. Because he says, and he said it many times, without sharing there will be no justice, without justice there will be no peace, and without peace there will be no future. And I talked about it, and Alfred, I'm sure this is what you're referring to, but somebody else who is hearing these videos for the first time might not know. I talk about it historically in reference to the Marshall Plan. When the United States, I think unwittingly and unknowingly, tried the principle of sharing, and it worked. And right after World War II, the United States gave excesses of their resources to Western Europe to keep it from going back into another world war. Because at that time we had developed nuclear weapons. The Russians had the nuclear bomb too. And with these two competing forces, had Europe gone back into another world war, it might have been nuclear. It might have ended all life on this planet. So they needed to do something to help build Europe back up. It was an important thing that we did. And it was called the Marshall Plan, and we gave excesses of our resources to Western Europe. Now, it didn't stop with that. Those nations eventually gave back in payment resources that they had after they had rebuilt their nations. They gave it back in payment. So the principle of sharing, when Ben talked about it, and I've noticed it too when I talk about it to people in my own life or in this channel or in lectures or doing television or radio interviews or whatever I've done in the past, the first knee-jerk reaction of every American is, that's communism. That's capitalism. And they really don't know what they're talking about, because communism, just as socialism, just as the free market's commercialization and capitalism is, they're just economic ideologies. And in the future, ideologies won't have as big a part and role to play in humanity's life, whether it's spiritual ideologies or economic ideologies or political ideologies, as they do today. So sharing actually transcends communism. It's different than socialism and capitalism. It has nothing to do with those ideologies. It's just giving a resource that a country has in excess of freely to another nation so that they can use it. And then that nation would have an excess too, because according to the masters, every nation has some excess that they're hoarding from another nation. Would give it back in payment, whether it's directly to that nation that gave them the resource or to another nation that's totally different than that nation that needs that resource. And it would be a very complex web of logistics that will eventually be headed up by one of the masters that will be working with the United Nations as a whole other department. Now, these masters are uncorruptible, and I have biblical proof for those people who are religious of how I can sit here and say that these masters are uncorruptible based off of something that Paul wrote to the Romans. So I'm going to talk about that too in reference to your question about love. Okay, so in essence, love is unity. And I guess you could say unity is love if you wanted to put it from that perspective, but love is unity. And goodwill is the lowest aspect of love. But to answer your question, I would say that the next level up from that would be cooperation. I'm assuming. And that would be even on an individual level, but also on a national and international level would be cooperation. They would start to cooperate with one another. perhaps not have perfect peace, but learn to work together, especially if they're trying to solve the problem of the environment. They would be able to cooperate with one another enough, to trust one another enough to where they would actually do something about a problem that's really affecting every one of us on this planet. So goodwill, and then I would say, which is, like I said, just not wishing somebody ill will, to eventually where you're cooperating with them, you're working with them. And then eventually trusting them. And then eventually creating a just situation, especially if it's amongst nations. And then eventually peace. And it will be a peace amongst nations, but eventually it will be a peace amongst each individuals, to where we won't fear our brother as the way that we do now, and sisters as the way we do now. We won't even have to lock our doors and those kind of things. But it will... So I guess, like I said, to answer your question, Alfred, the next level up would be cooperation, would be my guess. But the biblical passage that I wanted to talk about in reference to what you're asking has to do with what Paul wrote to the Romans in 13:8. And those people who listen to these videos know that I don't quote the Bible in every video. So this one I am going to, because I think it's important for us to look at it. Also, too, I think it's important to keep in mind, especially if you're religious, you might not believe anything that I'm saying about Maitreya. But if you take this and hopefully learn from it, it might change your life. And that is, when you look at the Bible or the Quran or even the Ageless Wisdom Teachings or what Ben said as an ideology, and don't do anything with it, it does you really no good. It does the world no good. In a lot of ways, it can be harmful to the person and to those around that person, especially if they're really dogmatic and zealot about what they believe to be right. So there's all these verses in the Bible that reinforce people's ideology that I think were put in there by none other than just a regular person. Over the centuries, as it was passed along and transcribed and translated and da-da-da-da-da. These verses were put in there, and they're creating confusion. They're creating hatred and bigotry amongst each other because they're looking at it in the wrong way. But then when you read Romans 13:8, this is a truth that if you applied it to yourself could change your life. Just as what Jesus said, what you sow shall you reap. You don't really hear pastors talking about this. I've never heard a televangelist on TV beating his podium, screaming out, "What you sow shall you reap." I've never heard them say that. But listen to what I'm reading when it comes to what Paul is trying to say, and then I'll talk about it. He says, "Owe no man anything but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law." And I think that, my own biblical opinion about Paul and people's view of Paul, especially the Christians in the world who take what Paul says as the gospel truth. Everything he said was coming from God is what they believe. I think they're missing really who and what Paul's value is to not only Christians, but to the whole world. Is Paul was a truth seeker. He was seeking the truth. And there was times when he was writing, and I do think he was experiencing nothing but love and unity, such as what he wrote to the Romans in 13:8. He was saying, if you love thy neighbor as thyself, if you see yourself as your neighbor, which is another way of saying, if you experience unity, how can you commit adultery? How could you be jealous of your neighbor's possessions? How could you even want to even lie or harm someone? Because you're only harming yourself. When you see life with unity and nothing but unity, you see yourself as the world and the world as you. You don't see any difference between the two. You can't experience fear because it's nothing but you. These masters, that's how they see life. That's how I can say they're uncorruptible. They won't have any desire to get rich off of and be corrupt in any way because they see nothing but unity. Now, if you look at Paul, who did a lot of really good, in the world, and he also did I think a lot of harm, because people, maybe not him personally, but the people's view of what he was saying was he was maybe not always experiencing that sense of unity. And then he would write something to, let's say, the Corinthians or to the Philippians or whoever. And at that time, he wasn't experiencing unity, but yet people are taking it as God's word. You know what I mean? When they should just be looking at him as a seeker. You can get the same sense of who and what a true truth seeker is by reading the letters that Van Gogh wrote to his brother. In that same way, as you would, I think, from reading from Paul and so forth. And so when he said this, I think he was truly experiencing unity. And when you experience unity, like I was saying, you have no desire to lie. You have no reason to lie. You have no desire to harm someone. You have no desire to gain anything from them or exploit them or steal from them or whatever. You have no desire to do any of that. And anybody, whether they're a political figure, religious figure, spiritual figure, person in your life, or a stranger, if they are not speaking from the standpoint of unity, they're not speaking the truth. Period. And so, but it's also important to understand that as a truth seeker, you won't always experience the truth. You'll fall back into the same old ways, and then you got to go back and look at it again. So you really can't intellectualize it. You really can't draw conclusions from it. It's not going to do you any good. And Ben's master wrote about the need for unity in almost the same way as Paul was writing, not only this, but in terms of what he wrote to the Philippians. I can do all things through Christ who empowers me, I think is how isn't that what it says? When he talks about how with unity, all things are possible. So I don't think Paul was talking about the individual Jesus. I think he was talking about his experience of unity, which is also, you could refer to as the Christ within the heart of the person. You know what I mean? The Christ principle and those kind of things, which is the same thing. It's one and the same thing. But Ben's master said, unity must be sought for with all diligence. In unity, there is not only strength, but beauty. Cultivate unity as a wise gardener cultivates his garden, tending carefully each new bud and shoot. So don't draw conclusions. Seek it out, just as Paul was seeking it out, And then eventually, you'll experience it all the time as these masters do. That's the destiny of not only each individual, but also of the nations in the world, by the way. Unity follows every true manifestation of love and graces each achievement of the Spirit. Take unity as your banner and walk the way of power. Unity makes all things possible. Without unity, nothing is certain. The finest possibilities come to dust. Achievement lies in the right use of the given capacities. Lacking unity, the highest potential may be wasted. And then before I read the last little bit, because I want to leave you with this last little bit, the two things that teachings that Maitreya gave to me that really changed my life, Alfred. The first one is he said, peace always comes from within. I was looking outward for comfort. I was looking outward at the time for any kind of agreement, to my life or whatever, right? To help give me peace. But peace always comes from within. When you have peace within, it doesn't matter what's going on around you. You are experiencing peace. The other thing that Sai Baba said when somebody said to him, he goes, I want peace. He said, get rid of I, get rid of want, and you'll have peace. But anyway, the other thing that Maitreya said to me that I hope will help you is when he said to me, I never judge anyone. on whether they're good or bad. I only notice the good things that they do. And just as a person who looks to the Bible in an ideological way and the truths in the Bible are missed, I looked at it in the same way. I was looking at it as Maitreya, the Christ, coming back, is not going to come back as the judge and jury. He's going to come back because he loves people. And he's not going to judge us on whether we're good or bad. He's only going to notice the good things that we do. That's how I saw what he was saying and interpreted what he said initially. So for years, what he said to me really did me no good because of the way that I was interpreting it. Do you see what I'm saying? It wasn't until I took it and tried to use it for myself with the people in my life that I was critical of, that it started to change my life. Then I started to see some of the good things that they were doing and not focus so much on my critique of them. So, and this also has to do with unity too, based on what Ben's master said. So I wanted to leave you with Ben's master's words, but also just share with you some of the things that Maitreya said. But to continue on with this article that he wrote about unity, he said, "Unity is a manifestation of spirit, for the true nature of humanity is one. All that leads to unity benefits the race and lends wings to the journey. Unity is invincible. The dark ones beat on the shield of unity in vain." Let me stop right there. Any politician that is not speaking about unity and oneness is, whether they realize it or not, working in favor of the dark ones. Period. End of story. If they're talking in a divisive way, they are helping out the dark ones, as they say. That's why I stand up against those politicians that aren't speaking about unity. The only way to bring about a future for humanity is for us to get there together. Period. There is no other way. It is not a question of left or right. It is a question of together. That is the only way. So, moving on. The time is coming when unity will be achieved, but the first steps in that direction must be taken now. Not later, not after breakfast. It should be taken now. Useless it is. This is important. Useless it is to wait for others to start. The move towards unity must be made by each one. Nothing so pierces the web of unity as criticism. 1,000 possibilities are lost in this way. Keep silent the tongue of criticism and protect the precious fabric so carefully spun. I love you guys. You guys take care, enjoy the day, and I look forward to putting out videos in the very near future. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.